Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar about product segmentation. I'm delighted to have you all here today. Today, I'm going to speak about a topic that is really dear to my heart. Over the time when I've been working with pricing in the spare part business, I've had a lot of learnings of this topic. I've seen a lot of different examples on segmentation, how it's done. And in the end, that's why what I try to talk about today. The learnings that I have on how our customers and the prospects that I meet from a day-to-day basis, and how they are actually doing segmentation and the best practices that we can find for that. So with that, let's jump into the agenda for today. And if we go and look at the discussion topics, we have: why do we do segmentation from the first start? What are the objectives from the business? And what are the objectives from the pricing guys? We understand that we need to apply price methods to our segments. So that has a big part of why we're doing segmentation. And we also need to think about finding a good balance with the level of sophistication, details, and the organization capabilities that you have. I've seen the cases where companies have had more than 500, 1,000 segments. And, does that really make sense depending on what kind of capabilities that they have? We'll also look at the regional elements of segmentation, and do we have any geography-specific things that we need to keep a track of? So these are the main topics of today. So let's jump into the first one about the objectives of why we're doing segmentation from the start. So of course, the business objectives are there. We need to identify underpriced items and understand where we have a margin potential. This is really the key. Where do we bring value and where do we not really capture that margin potential? Likewise, we need to understand, okay, where have we overpriced? As a result, we have low market share, and we might need to, or there is a potential actually to drive revenue from these specific segments. From the segmentation objectives, we do segmentation because we need to apply different price methods. For example, the value-based or the technical attribute-based pricing methods, the competitive-based methods, the kit and bill of material, the supersessions, and all of these different methods needs to have a baseline for where they are going to use. We need to be able to find opportunities for price differentiation. Using segmentation, we can understand that we have different price potentials within these. We might need to do local market commercial conditions. We might need segmentation for analytics and reporting needs. That is not really related to the price method or how we price, but more on understanding a category, how that category develops if we have some problems in that across different segments. To find the right balance with the level of segmentation details and organizational capabilities is the challenge that we also have to understand, okay, we want a really good segmentation, but what is good for us? If we go too detailed, that might cause a lot of administration issues later on. So let's first with looking at the price methods. And here I kind of state the most common ones. Value-based pricing. Here we look at attributes of the price and try to find what the perceived value are for the customers. And here we do that for products where we have a unique position. We can also do it for the other kind of products using technical attributes. There are some pros and cons with that. It's probably the most sophisticated price method that we have, but it's also relatively resource intensive. So you don't want to do that price method on all your items. You do it on a limited scope where it really makes sense. Looking at competitive-based pricing, that really covers the commercial aspects of pricing, how it's done. Value-based pricing are much more focused on the product organization. Advanced cost-based pricing is for easy price setting for the bulk of your products. It's really the method used when we need to have a price for all our products, but we might not want to spend a lot of time on each and every item. So the benefits is, of course, that it's resource effective from that case, but it has the disadvantages of doing a cost plus pricing approach. We also look at kit-based pricing, where we add value as a one-stop shop using a bill of material, providing multiple items that is needed, for example, in a repair operation. That might come from different sources of segments as a part. We also have reference right and left time, supersession pricing. We might have statistical-based pricing in the background. We might want to do supply-driven pricing where we differentiate prices based on our capability to deliver if we have the items on stock, or if we have a long lead time where we have a difficulty to deliver, that has a big impact on our capability to price the items. So understanding where the price methods that we have will have a big impact on how the segmentation actually looks and what is the best way going forward. The next point that we had in our list is to finding the basis for the price differentiation. And here are some practical examples. And if you would like to have a really high kind of view on this, within the aftermarket business, we define some items as what we call captive and some that are commercial. So that's really on the high level side, meaning that, okay, captive means that it's really an OEM's design. It can't really be found anywhere outside of the OEM's network. It's very proprietary in that sense. Whereas the commercial items, they are commercials for a reason. They are available, maybe not in the supermarket, but you will be able to find it through different distributors, some specific suppliers that are doing these kind of things. And then you have the aftermarket specific things that are, for example, remanufactured kits and warranty items. So this is a good example of finding differentiation. And within the captive products, we have what we call captive items, captive consumables, and captive simple. And I think this relates really to how much competition we might have within the captive items sites. So, for example, captive consumables, things that are consumed on a relatively basis, for example, a milling head or a roller that is specifically designed to fit within an OEM's application. Those you won't be able to find that on the market, but there might be people wanting to re-engineer it and start selling that to a market. So for the really high volume items, in those cases, it might actually be so that they are they might not have competition now, but they might have over time. And likewise for the captive simple, like wear sleeves or brackets, well, if you cannot deliver those, it might be so that it's relatively easy for the customers to actually go to their local workshop and have them re-engineer the part so that it can be used. Likewise, on the commercial side, we have the similar kind of case where we have what I call commercial unique and commercial commodity parts. Take an example of a hydraulic cylinder. When I was working at Atlas Copco, we had some specific cylinders that has a really long stroke length to be fitted in some of the underground drilling machines. They were not really standard at all. We, of course, Atlas Copco in this case, they bought it from a supplier, so we didn't make it ourselves. So it is a commercial product. We also had a lot of hydraulic cylinders that were, standard items that you could buy off the shelf from any supplier. And if you just group them together in one family, calling them hydraulic cylinders, well, then you will miss out on opportunity to identify the ones where you are really unique. You provide a value with that uniqueness, be able to provide spare part for those hydraulic cylinders. Whereas on the commodity points, you have a relatively small value. You need to benchmark against your competition to understand, okay, the customer will be able to find these alternatives elsewhere if he decides to. So this is a good example on, okay, commercial considerations that needs to be taken in. We need to take this price differentiation capabilities in mind when we're designing the way that we operate. Is there any other things that we can think about to find price differentiation? Well, of course, the product segment says it all. In many cases, you will be able to say that, okay, if we have an impeller that is a costed item, it's really designed for us. Yeah, it's a really commercial item. We have a really good capability here to take a premium on our products. That's driven by the product segment itself. We don't really need too much more information than that. We know there is a know-how within the organization that says this is a captive item. It's as simple as that. Then if we go into the more areas to understand if we're making or buying the products. If we are making the products, then we could be quite clear that there is some sort of captivity. If we buy the product, we do that from a supplier. Then the question is the supplier supplying this to our end customers, or are they simply supplying it to us? So understanding the supplier becomes important as a point of this. Do we have drawings on this? If we have done the drawing ourselves, then it probably indicates a proprietary design or a unique design. The supplier can give us a lot of information depending on how the supplier acts. So some suppliers might be very protective or of your parts, or some will offer them to whoever might be willing to buy them. And this is a supplier know-how in the end. Item uniqueness, competitive data, sales volume, any market share information we can get. Typical identifiers if they're understanding if there is a competitive pressure on these points. Sales volume, can be a driver to say that, okay, if this has a high volume, then it's probably more commercially attractive at least. But does it say that it is a competitive available? Not really, but it gives us an identification at least. Life cycle position also gives us an indication if it's early. Well, then we are probably the only one offering that to the market. Obsolete stages, also probably we are the only one that really has that on stock still. And then we have different kind of strategies along the product life cycle position. Warranty items, especially in some specific industries, we need to treat warranty items a little bit special because on how we reimburse our dealers or our customers. Other things like complexity, repair type, production methods can also be used to understand, okay, how captive or commercial are these types of items. So, in the end, there might be a lot of different kind of drivers for this. If you have that data or not, that depends on the current case, but it's something that we should keep in mind when looking at segmentation as such. Then if we look at the models itself for building the segmentation structure, and I think I have identified 3 main tracks or tendencies on how to do segmentation. And that's what we're going to have a deep dive into these as we go along here. The first one, we call that product hierarchy, using engineering, in the end, engineering data to say that, okay, this is the product, this is a filter, this is a belt, using that kind of information to drive segmentation. The second one is conditional matching, combining information about across the product. For example, who is the supplier? What competitive information do we have? Is there any things that, looking a lot more on the commercial aspect. We call that conditional matching. And then we have a third one, that we call segmentation calculation. And that is using all of informations like the price differentiators to be able to make a calculation or an estimation of a segment that the item should be a part of. And actually, it's kind of funny because these methods, they are proposed by different kind of often driven by different kind of consulting companies, and I see a big tendency that a product hierarchy focus has been largely developed, and this is the go-to kind of market way within Europe, whereas the segmentation calculation methodology is actually quite focused in the US. And of course, there are kind of flavors to this, but if I should generalize, this is a thing that I see, and that is really exciting for me, at least, to be in a global position, to see that depending on the mindset, depending on the markets, we have different kind of preferred approaches. And of course, there's not one model that fits them all. So I actually recommend to use some sort of combination of the 3 to build a good structure. But let's go into the first one, product hierarchy. What is that in the end? Well, in this case, we see that we have a technical driven structure to say that we have, for example, air filters, we have oil filters, we have water filters. We know that the air filters, okay, they are relatively specific to our machines. They fit within a cabin or whatever it might be. In this case, we might want to use a technical or a value-based pricing approach. The price driver is volume, and then we have different filter paper quality levels that we want to use as the price drivers. Whereas for oil filters and water filters, here we might want to look at competitors, because company A and company B sells these oil filters and water filters across the board. And driven by example, the value-based product approach, we need to be able to have an apples to apples kind of approach on this. On the ones where we, for example, have a competitor where we have company A and company B, in the end, if you have a product organization, for example, like here where you have oil filters, water filters, you have a lot of different kind of filters that might generate 5 different filter categories. All of them are competitor driven by a series of companies. Then it might actually be better not to keep the engineering structure for analytical purposes, but to build a much more commercial driven approach. So if we look at the pros of this method, we need to have this for the value-based pricing approaches, apples to apples. It really needs to be engineering driven, and the engineering build structures can be used. The cons of this, that it doesn't really capture the commercial conditions in the product groups. So for example, we don't know if it's a captive item or if it's really a commercial item. Within the category, it can vary depending on the hydraulic cylinder case that I showcased. And it's not suitable for situations with many segmentation drivers, because you will the models can quickly explode, since spare parts, there are so many different technical niche parts within machines. So in many cases you end up with 500, 1,000 different segments, and in the end it might be so that it's really cumbersome to actually manage that over time. Looking at conditional matching, that is the other way around, to say that, okay, let's see, instead of looking at a product hierarchy approach, we try to identify what are the commercial suppliers items. We take the supplier approach instead, to say that company A, company B, and company C, they are very loyal, let's say it like that. They are very transparent on their competitive or on their situation. We might get a competitive benchmark on this, and we will use the list prices from these companies to be able to price it. And then it really doesn't really matter what kind of technical different characterization it has. If they are selling that to our end customers in a competitive setting, well, we need that kind of overrules the technical parameters. We might also say that, okay, if we don't do it by supplier, we might do it on other priorities. Like if we know that we are buying it, it's a maintenance type of item, the complexity is rated as simple, and we have a relatively high sales volume, well, then we probably know that it is a highly commercial item. Using that kind of information to define that, okay, this is a pricing segment. It might be in different technical clusters or so, but we will classify that at highly commercial and price them accordingly. So this is the baseline for conditional matching, working with commercial considerations more than product hierarchies. This has also some pros and cons, of course. It captures similar commercial conditions across products. It enables differentiation for non-product related segmentation. And if something changes, we can also have an automatic resegmentation based on some of these dynamic variables, for example, sales volume, for example, who the supplier is, for whatever reasons. And also, a lot importantly, it aggregates smaller product groups into larger groups for easy administration, compared to a situation when you have engineering built structures. The cons, of course, is that it can generate pricing inconsistency for similar products. So for example, if we have an item that is highly commercial from one supplier, and you look at an item that is from a niche supplier, not really specific, there is a big result or a big chance that you will actually have a big price discrepancy in between two products that are, from a technical point of view, relatively similar. And that is the con of using much more of a commercial consideration. But in the end, if they are defendable, if you can defend that price to say that, this is a niche product, this is a very commercial product, then it might be able to justify that for your competitors. And the cons is, compared to the segmentation on the engineering built data, it requires more item-related data in the end. You can't really use their engineering structures in the way that you're used to. The third one is the segmentation calculation points, and here it's kind of I see it most effective when you can take the data that you have, use the data that you have to build up some sort of scoring model. So for example, if you know that I have a make or buy information, if I make it or buy it, if I can do count, for example, on the competitors that I found for this. If I know that the product group, I know that bearings is a little bit more commercial than shafts from the start. If I know sales, I know that high volume items are more commercial generally than the low volume items. If I know some suppliers that are more commercially driven or so, using that data that you have available, building some sort of scoring to say that, well, actually, when these data points indicates a low score, yeah, then it's a captive one. We can have a lot more higher margins on that. If it has a little bit higher score, it's semi-captive and so forth. And we can use that to drive margins and how we actually benchmark according to that. So kind of the quick and dirty way, making us to understand roughly, is it captive or not? And that gives value to, for example, the bulk of our products. If we don't want to think too much on the decision of how to price these items, this could be a way forward. So the pros is it's really the easy price setting using a cost plus approach. In the end, you're quite limited to cost plus. But it's also more forgiving for data errors or missing data. Okay, if we're missing a data, okay, we don't get the score, but we still get a rough idea. It's not completely incorrect. The cons is that it requires a set of variables across all items in scope. So therefore, gathering a lot of data for items, well, you're probably better to use some sort of more refined segmentation or conditional matching approach. And when you group them together in these relatively big groups, you have limited analytical capabilities to do products-focused business development on these ones. So, and of course, with these pros and cons, I would recommend that you actually build a product strategy that is focused on product hierarchy, or combining that segmentation approach with when it makes sense. For example, okay, we have an impeller for the water pump. We know that it is like this. We're going to use a value-based product. We have the capabilities to gather that data for that product group, and it makes sense because it's a big part of our business. Conditional mapping, we're going to use that to cover more the bigger bulk of our captive items. And some segmentation scoring approaches where we have a lot less information and we need to be a lot more broad in our sense to be efficient. And the reason why we do this is, of course, to balance the level of segmentation details and the organizational capabilities. We need to understand, from the organization point of view, we really need to understand, do we have the capability for within the group to define, okay, is it impellers and water pumps, and how is the drivers there? Really using understanding the capability that we have. We might want to level the product segmentation given from engineering if we have that, and we want to leverage the supplier commercial information available. We need to map against what kind of master data we have available for pricing, for example, to be able to do the segmentation scoring or whatever it might be. And the capability within the organization to gather and structure the information. For example, to be able to gather information for the impeller of diameters or whatever it might be. And I would propose kind of a rule of thumb here. So for example, if you have an organization and you have one full-time equivalent that are responsible for doing pricing, that one can manage roughly about 100 segments, depending on the skill set, of course, of that person. But if you throw, for example, an organization to manage 500 different segments, you will probably need 5 people to be able to do that in a more refined manner. Great. Next element is local segmentation. So we kind of covered the global aspects of this, the organization, the needs from that kind of perspective. But we also know that we might have different local needs. And a practical example, within Europe, we might be sourcing an electronic component from a supplier that is based in Europe that doesn't really have any presence in the US, in South America, in Asia, in Australia, in Africa. So in that sense, it becomes available within Europe. These guys, they might know there might be sales offices within Europe, varying degree of difficulty to find it out and so forth. But in the US or in Latin America, it will be very hard for customers to find it directly from the supplier, and therefore we would consider them as captive. This could be really important to maintain if it has a big impact of the business. And this is often commercial driven, as I mentioned on the supplier side. We also need to understand, of course, for the local organizations to understand, okay, is this actually captive in our business? Is there, so we also need to think about that. We might also need to use a different price methodology within different kind of reasons. Gathering local competitive data on local markets, for example. So the conclusions that I draw from this is the product-based hierarchy is really recommended for value-based pricing approaches. And homogeneous segments with relatively given commercial conditions. Conditional matching strategies are recommended for where you have a clear commercial condition across the product groups. And the segmentation calculation is really recommended for the bulk of your items, possibly with low data quality and availability, that needs a simple, less sensitive and effective approach. And in cases where you have some clear commercial situations in the local markets, I would also recommend that you actually think about doing local market segmentations for these cases. So this is really the points that I have for today. I hope you come with from this webinar with some key takeaways. And you know, I really urge you to look at this from different angles. And in many cases, some of you have been having pricing consultants coming in with their consultancy approaches, probably being one of these. But keep in mind that there are other alternatives, and not only one segmentation method fits all. So that's it for me. Thanks a lot. And if you would like to reach out for whatever reason, you can do that directly to me using, for example, my email address. So thanks for that, and have a good day, everybody.